Greetings everybody. Thank you so much for clicking on the link. By now you will have seen we have the 1-hour video program of Mum and the celebration we all had of her passing, and also the photographs. So I hope that you've enjoyed those. And I'm taking the opportunity here to add an extra content of me talking with you for a while. And I very much welcome that opportunity. I'm delighted to be speaking with you here as I sit 3 weeks after her send-off funeral on the 15th of June and 7 weeks since she passed on the 18th of May. The time between her passing and the funeral, those 4 weeks, were extremely frenetic, trying to do our best to give her the very best send-off possible. And I'm so glad that many of you fed back to us that you felt it was a great fitting tribute to our mum. But since the time of her passing on the 15th of June, there's been time to reflect for all of us, I think. And one of the things that I kept getting was to showcase Mum's life a little more than we've been able to do. During the eulogies, of course, that's not the appropriate time to talk at length, because there's so many of you wanted to lay tributes to Mum, and what magnificent words were spoken about our Mum. And a 90-minute program probably wouldn't be able to contain her life. And I feel a duty as her son and someone that was privileged to have a very good ringside seat of her great life to report a bit more on Betty's life, Mrs. Omotoso's life, our mother's life. So that's the first reason that I would like to say some words. And also to correct some of the omissions that when I made my eulogy that were not spoken, that I'd like to say and take the opportunity to say now. And perhaps selfishly, the third reason would be for my own healing. I did mention in my eulogy that I feel very much connected to Mum since her passing and feel her speaking to me. And she's telling me to not put myself out, Peter, that it's good enough. But once again, I'm saying, Mum, for my love for you, I feel that I really would like to perform this duty, I feel, to show a little bit more and lay a record down of your existence, your 92 years on this planet. And so I would just say that the first thing that I'd like to correct is the missing out when I talk to you of the participation during her send-off, during her funeral. We put the numbers together and there were 55 people in the funeral, which was wonderful. Almost everyone that was invited did come. But what wasn't mentioned, that as we sat there were probably up to 30 people in real time also participating in the funeral in 15 locations around the world. And given that Mum, one of her characteristics was that she was a trailblazer, she was fearless and she traveled to places other people wouldn't have considered, I felt that it was a grave omission not to share with you all the people all around the world. And when I sat down and reflected, she virtually circumnavigated the globe. So if I start in the east of the people that were there that day in the funeral, we can start in the Philippines, where there's a very lovely lady that loves Mum so much, that's known her for 20 years, and she was watching the whole thing live. If we move eastward, we go to the eastern tip of Australia, Byron Bay. Another friend of mine that fell in love with Mum years ago, who was fixed to the screen watching. Then we have our cousins in Sydney and Canberra as we move eastwards. Finally, we get to the middle Australia in the south, Adelaide, where a dear friend of many, many years and who's met Mum twice was watching the events with great care and affection. As we move towards Perth, there were so many people. Simon's family, my younger brother's home is in Perth, and all his family, his wife and others were watching. Paula was watching and her mum Leslie. And I have some very, very dear friends that were also very much present and tuned into Mum, all as we sat there in that church. If we head to the north, we get straight to Sabah, eastern Malaysia. Mum had friends there, 2 people watching, who reported back and said it was a wonderful send-off. And as we edge just a little bit more to the east, we get to Brunei, where one of my friends of long standing was watching the whole proceedings and fed back with great support on the day. And Mum, as you'll learn as I go ahead, spent many, many, many happy many, many happy months in Brunei. It was one of her special treasured memories. And that over 8 years. And as we head to the east, we then arrive in Bangkok, where I have two friends, very dear friends, who know Mum very, very well, from Brunei, I might add, and they were watching. They were part of the funeral. Continue east, we get to Doha, where I reside, in Qatar, where I've been for quite some time now, and there were several people here that were watching Mum's funeral as we sat in that church. And as we go eastwards, ever further, westward I should say, how could we miss out Nigeria, which played such a great role in Mum's life, where so many people were fixed to the screen watching her funeral in real time as we live streamed it. Moving further to the west, we get to North Wales, the roots of Mum, where she's from, where some of our relatives were watching, and crossing the border back into England, just across from North Wales, there was also a friend watching, and there were a couple of people in London who couldn't come that watched it on the live stream. So as we head westwards, we cross the Atlantic Ocean and we arrive in Atlanta, where one of Mum's oldest and dearest friends and her children were watching the send-off for our dear Mum. Crossing the continent of America, we arrive at Sacramento in California, where my oldest friend woke up at 3:30 in the morning, especially to partake with his dear auntie, and wouldn't have missed it for the world. He even took time off work in order to watch this and participate. And friends, a dear friend in San Diego, I do believe watched it later, but possibly also in real time. So now you have the Pacific Ocean, and you cross across Hawaii, and you end up back in the Philippines. So as I mentioned, she virtually circled the world, and it made for such an amazing send-off. I'd also like to thank the wonderful tributes that Auntie Josie gave, her oldest friend from the mid-50s, dear Beryl. What a fantastic oration that you gave and represented her proudly. We were so proud. And then Kate, who gave a very moving speech and has been a loyal friend to Mum for many, many, many years. Auntie Reva also got up, and even though she was a little bit nervous to speak, she pushed past her fear and stood up there and did her friend proud. And then the younger ones, Toyin, she represented her family, the Latunjis that we've known ever since we were kids, and gave, even though she said she was no orator, she did a fantastic job. And then Susan, the daughter of Mum's, one of her perhaps almost oldest friends as well, from the early 60s, our Auntie Monica, Susan, she did a great job, and it was so moving and touching. And then Mum's later life, she came to the UK and taught in Peckham, as I'll touch upon later. Her marvelously loyal friend Sandra had her superb son, Lamar, stand up and represent her so well. And I'm so pleased about that, because it represented that part of her life that was the last stage of her teaching. So thank you, everybody, and I'm glad to correct the record on the true number of participants. So that would probably bring to about 85 people were sending Mum off, which I think is, I'm so pleased. That's all that we ever wanted, was to give her a fitting tribute for the great, great life she led and all her dedication, her selfless life. So now I'd like to move on to showcasing Mum's life a little bit more. And as I mentioned, there's so much of it to actually show off. And this opportunity is something that I feel particularly driven to do, because Mum always used to say, "You're a very good presenter, Peter." And I would smile, because the only reason she knew that is because I told her that I was a good presenter. She simply believed that I was. So it's something that I feel that I do well. And as I put together our order of service, it was not my intention, but I now realize that it forms a very good foundation in order to cover parts of Mum's life. And if any of you have the hard copy handy, I would very much appreciate that perhaps you start at page 4, which is the first page of the pictures, the black and white ones. And this will be very enjoyable because I really love presenting. And I touched upon it in my eulogy, but you can see that it is an extraordinary documentation of Mum's life, because in the mid-50s, such a thing as a mixed marriage was unheard of. But Mum was fearless about it and thought, well, I love this man. That's all that counts. And the evidence of page 4, especially when you look at the picture at the bottom, is happy faces. All the Welsh folk on the right are smiling, and the folks who've come and Dad's friends are also smiling on the left. And you can see the proud father giving her away at the picture at the top. This, as I mentioned in my eulogy, was a very, very good foundation. And the evidence of my grandfather's acceptance of my father came from my younger brother Simon, who actually has the Bible that my grandfather gave to my dad. And it says this, I will read it to you. It says, to Simeon, which was one of my father's names, from your mum and dad. He put in inverted commas, mum and dad. From your mum and dad. From your new mum and dad. May this little book bring happy memories of our first meeting. So note the word happy memories of his first meeting and your arrival in England on May the 25th, 1953. Monday, he put, so he even noted the date. And then he wrote Proverbs 3 verses 5 and 6. And those were what Simon therefore picked out for the funeral, to have those read. And they are, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not to thine own understanding, Proverbs 5. And Proverbs 6, in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path. So those were the recommendations my grandfather gave to my father, with full acceptance and the way to lead his life. And the story goes that he was a little bit surprised when he was introduced to my father, but he said, as long as you look after my daughter, all is well. And I've recounted the story that Dad did look after my mum. He was a true gentleman, and as I said in my eulogy, the characteristics of the Omotosos, as my mum used to say, is that they are kind people. And that little word kind speaks volumes. They were kind, and I hope that we children have inherited some of that kindness, because it's such a great characteristics to have in this earth as we lead our lives. So looking at the next page of the brochure, if any of you have it open, something else I omitted to point out, which is important. There's a picture there of Mum with 2 little girls, and those are her sisters, my dear Auntie Bronwyn on the left and Auntie Mary on the right. They have passed on, and I wanted to say that I do believe that Mum is delightfully reunited with my dear aunties, and the little girl on the left features as her best lady. She's the lady in the group photo on the left, my Auntie Bronwyn, who gave Mum, who helped to give Mum away at her wedding. And her daughter, Auntie Bronwyn's daughter, scanned these photos, which has been tremendously useful. When Mum was growing up in Nigeria, she'd send the photos to her sister, and Auntie Bo would scan these photos, would keep them, and her daughter Alison scanned them for us. So we are tremendously grateful to have this record. Still on page 2 of the black and white, the bottom right hand corner, that's my grandfather when he was young. That's before he had my mum. And you can see how old that photo must be, just the beginning of the century perhaps. And what a wonderful record to have. And to the left you can see my mum with Richard and myself being quite young before we headed off to Nigeria. The photo just above that is a sneak preview of our life in Nigeria. And on that note, I'd say that it was just after the picture was taken, 1958. Well, Richard was born in 1958, I was born in 1960, and 1961 we headed off to Nigeria. that was the start of Mum's 28 years in Nigeria. And if you flip the page, you can see evidence of some of her life there from 1961 onwards. Simon was born in 1964 up in the northern part of Nigeria. Unfortunately, there was a war in Nigeria at that time, the Biafran War, and we had to return to the UK. We literally had to flee for our safety, and I think it was 1967, so Mum's 6th year, she found herself back in the North Wales. Luckily for me, I got to meet my grandfather and have very fond memories of him. But unfortunately, my grandmother had passed on in 1963 when I was 3 years old, and I never got to meet her. So my dear mum and I and my brothers were up in the UK for that year, and we returned back to Nigeria in 1968 to go to a school, All Saints School in Ibadan, where my mother was a teacher. So she continued her teaching career, and as a sneak preview, she taught children about 12 years old for 50 years. This was her career, very dedicated, and she changed the lives of so many young children. So here we found ourselves in Ibadan at 1968 in secondary school. The war ended just a couple of years later, and we headed off to the international school in Ibadan for 1970. So Mum's 9th year in Nigeria. You can see we took group photos, and you can see the three of us there, and my father on the bottom left of the black and white photo on page 6 looks a little bit like the actor Sidney Poitier. I always used to think he was so handsome, and in fact Sidney Poitier died this year at the ripe age of 96. So my dad was a little bit of a lookalike. So in 1973, we moved to Lagos, the capital of Nigeria. We were still in international school as boarding students, but my mum, of course, started to teach again in schools in Nigeria, always about the same age group, from 10 to 12 years old. And our upbringing was just wonderful. It's evident in the photographs. We feel so blessed to have had parents like my dad and my mum. So in 1977, my time was up in Nigeria. I'd got some A-level results that were good enough, and I headed off to Nottingham University, which is where my father had met my mum. He finished up there in 1956, but when I got there 20 years later, there were two lecturers that remembered him well. I did civil engineering, repeating in his footsteps, and they remembered him because he had done civil engineering at that time. So from 1977 to 1980, around about that time, my father left the Nigerian Railways where he'd worked, so we left Lagos and returned to Nigeria, to Ibadan, which is my father's hometown, to a house that he'd built, a very nice house. And I, of course, was in the UK, in university, but I would visit from time to time on holidays. I graduated in 1980 and started to work, and Mum, in 1988, for various reasons, mainly due to her safety and the fact that Nigeria had a few issues and her health, she moved back to the UK in 1988. But Mum and Dad were very much still together, and he would visit a couple of times a year. So from 1960 to 1988, 28 years of life in Nigeria for my mum. Now, when she was in London, she started a new career, a new phase to her career, I should say, in Peckham. And this is how she met Sandra, her good friend. And this was something where she'd commute every day, a couple of buses, and as some of the people in the funeral said, there's still a legacy of her teaching spell in Peckham, and still some of the things she did are talked about till this day. But it was a little bit of a coincidence, because as Mum arrived from Nigeria in 1988, I emigrated to Australia in 1989. So I moved away from my mother. But what this allowed her to do is to visit Australia 11 times. This is why she was such a great traveler. she traveled 11 times to Australia to see me on an annual basis in Melbourne and then also in Perth. But I'm very happy to say that Dad also came. In 1994, we had this fantastic holiday where we toured around Australia with my mum and my dad. We went up to the Queensland area. We took little trips to exotic islands. We videoed the event, and it was something that Dad, I was so pleased that he also came out to see the Australian terrain. So in about 1997, Dad finally left Nigeria himself and joined my mum in the UK. I was very happy about this, and he managed to get work, some civil engineering work, and it was quite a surprise. I never thought I'd see the day that Mum and Dad were again together, but living together in the UK. And he spent a good 7 years there, 6 to 7 years, and sadly, he passed away in 2004. And that's why if you flick to the color pictures in the brochure, you won't see any pictures of my dad, because the pictures I have of him are not electronic. It was pre-digital media, and it left Mum alone for the 18 years of her life. However, I had moved from Australia in the year 2002. Oh, I might add, in the millennial year, we all came to London, and that was a grand event where Dad said we all need to meet. So we did, and at the millennial 2000 clicked, we were all together in London. And I remember that was the year, May 2000, that my mother turned 70. And I wrote a poem for her called An Ode to Mum. And I had my friend in Perth video me recounting this long poem of my mother's life. I really will have to go and look that up. It's on video cassette. So here I find myself 22 years later, videoing again, not a poem this time, but trying to recount Mum's life. So as I said, after 2002, I left Australia and moved to Brunei. Now, 2002, I'd been there 2 years as my dad passed away, so he didn't have time to come and visit me in Brunei, which was a shame. But from 2002 to 2010, this is probably the time when I spent the most time with my mother. Because now that Dad had passed on, and I had this amazing house on stilts that looked right out to the sea, a big compound, and I had a maid that lived under us, Gina, who was just a wonderful lady. So it was the perfect opportunity for Mum to escape the winter. So every December the 2nd, maybe the first week in, January, after the New Year, Mum would head off to Brunei and spend as long as 2 months to 10 weeks with me. And people said, how could you spend so long with your mum? And I'd say, well, the first 2 weeks we used to adapt a little bit, but after that, we got used to each other. So that occurred every year for 8 years. And so if you wonder why I'm close to my mum, we spent a lot of time together. And we had this fantastic existence. And opposite us was a friend from India, Terry Machado. And I mentioned Bangalore. And she's the lady that is just such an amazing family friend, and so dedicated to Mum after being neighbors for 8 years. And as I said, one of the people watching on the live stream from India. So we would do some amazing things when Mum came. We would take trips all over the place. We went to Hong Kong. We went to Singapore. We went to Malaysia. We went to Vietnam. We toured around Brunei. And every year it was something great. And as I went to work, she'd go and meet her friends around the Shell camp. I worked for Shell. So this was a time when I really got close to my mum. And of course, Dad had passed on. She never got in the way of my own relationships and was always encouraging me to marry and have children, etc. But to be honest with you, I was quite fine with the way my life was. And I have many friends. So there was room for everybody. It was a good balance. It was a win-win all round. So during those 8 years, sadly, they came to an end in 2010 when I moved on to Bangkok, which was great because I love Thailand. So now I was working as a petroleum engineer in Thailand for about 1.5 years. And during that time, Mum came twice. And once again, we had a fantastic time. I had a maid helping me, Aim, and her and Mum became really great friends when I was at the office. And Mum and I would take trips on the weekends. I didn't have a lot of time. I'd hire a car with a driver And we'd go to all these exotic places, and I remember once an elephant came and put its trunk through the window to try and take food out of Mum's hand, and it's a memory that we will never forget. Even later in her life, when her memory was challenged, she never forgot about this elephant, and who could forget a thing like that? So Thailand is an exotic place, and we had an exotic visits with Mum, and I had a very nice apartment. Everything was just perfect. They really were great visits that I was privileged to have. And in fact, if you turn to the brochure, if you have it open to page 8 and 9, the picture in page 8 in the middle, with a glass of wine, toasting life, that's Mum in Brunei. We went to spend some time in a 7-star hotel that's quite famous, and so she's enjoying her life there. And if you look above, Mum's triumphant smile of arriving in Thailand airport, that's in Thailand. And the middle of page 9, we're standing on top of a 45-story building having cocktails. You can see a river in the background. Again, with Mum's famous outfit, so simple, yet so elegant. So many colors. She would buy those trousers for maybe £5 maximum, and the t-shirt is £7. And even though she was a lady that was not expensive taste, as you know, she always managed to look very elegant and chic somehow. She had her own style. That's when she used to sport a little bit of color in her hair as well, until she just let it go silver, which also looked great. So on page 9, you can see Mum standing in front of a swimming pool with the sea in the background, and that was in Sabah near Kota Kinabalu, where we also had friends watching her funeral. So I did pick a few of Mum with all her joyous times in various parts of the world. And I can say that one other thing happened when we were in Thailand that is very important to my mother's life. From 2010 to 2011, that was when I was in Thailand. Unfortunately, Mum came to me one morning and said, "Peter, I cannot see out of my left eye. It's just dark. I can see something, but not very much." And that's when her macular degeneration started. So from 2011 to 2022, when she passed, she had to suffer with this disease for 11 years. Some of you may know it, it's macular degeneration, and it's a degenerative disease, so it simply gets worse. The cells of your retina, they die. So within a year after she first noticed it, the other eye started to go, and within a year of that, she was unable to read ever again, because the sharp vision is gone and only the side vision remains. This was something that was a great blow to my mum, who was so visual, and the ability to entertain herself was extremely curtailed. She could watch some TV, but she couldn't see very much, and her great reading, she used to read a book every month minimum. So now she took to reading audiobooks, and I always used to smile because she'd say something like, "I'm just going to read a bit." But she would actually be listening to her programs. It wasn't particularly reading, but she also called it reading. But in summary for Mum's life, apart from her macula, her first 90 years were of very good health, and it allowed her to exude her qualities, which I mentioned in the eulogy, were kindness, selflessness, always focused on other people, good nutrition, looking after herself, no excesses, always having moderation in the way she performed her actions and in her thoughts and mind as well. Moderation was the key. And as I mentioned, she was extremely sensible. And because she was such a people person, on her 80th birthday, she received 80 birthday cards. In my eulogy, I said 70, but I've thought about it. It was 80. It was her 80th birthday. They were all over the flat. And this was because she was a loyal friend that always, when she kept in touch, she would remain in touch with you. She was constant, and her personality was not fickle in any way. I'm sure, as many of you know, that befriended her. This was one of her great qualities. So, it was not nice to see someone so diminished, with so much being taken away from her, um, almost humiliating in a way to watch this, but she took it nobly. She took it with good grace, as best she could. And you can see that all the photos of Mum that are not of her standing in the color pages, you may notice that her face has changed. It's not the same face that she had from the photos that you see of her earlier life standing up. And in fact, to my great surprise, every time I'd go home, she'd change again. And she regressed almost back to the photos that you see of her wedding day. She almost returned to that. And especially the photo on page 8, the first color photo, towards the left, I'd go and sit by my mother's side, and that face would be looking at me. And because her personality was being pushed to the side by this awful condition, and all the qualities that the people in the funeral spoke of her personality were essentially being made non-relevant because she was forgetting that part of herself. What I observed was that there was this great light that shone through. She became brighter and brighter. And one of the ladies that used to help Mum, Jean, she witnessed this change because she would sit with my mum for 4 hours, 3 hours every afternoon. And I know that she was witness to this light that my mum was emitting. The carers also saw the light, but it was harder for them to see it because when they would turn up, they always had a mission to go to the next client and they had to get a move on, do what they needed to do to help my mum and move on. But if you just sat and were with her without having to leave, you would see something which was very, very rare. Because given that her personality was forgotten to her, what was left? Basically, it was the essence of Mum. It was her spirit. And if you look at that photograph that I must keep referring to on the first color page on the left, you can see something of that spirit of what I'm talking about. You can see that young face that's gone back to her youth. And even her behavior and her voice, it returned. And the photo above that, you can see a sort of innocence which is completely hard to describe and is not in the earlier photos. And it took me some time to realize that I was seeing the spirit of Mum. And I know that's true because as I researched for this brochure, I looked at hundreds and hundreds of photographs. And none of them had a charge of loss or pain in my heart of the earlier ones. Because that was a life lived. It was done. There's no need to repeat that. It was good, and I'm grateful for it. But it was at the end, those photos, that's the bit that I could say burned me. Her light shone and burned me. As I do believe it burned Jean, the lady I mentioned that would sit with Mum for hours and just sit by her side. And that was the greatest beauty of my mum that I saw. And that was the beauty that I feel I want to meet her again. And someone said to me, in fact it was Jean, "Why didn't you show any grief? Please, when are you going to show your grief?" And I thought, well, as a man, it's a little bit different for us. But I have a way to tell you about my grief. And it was that we all within us have different voices that want to speak. And we have a choice whether we let them speak or not. But as I stood in that church, there was a sense that I should not let them show, maybe due to being somewhat shy. But the part that I would now let speak is the young part of me that misses its mum. That what it said and wanted to say was that even though you see me all composed here, standing before you, taking responsibility for everything, there is this part of me that would walk over to that coffin now with my mother's body in, lying there, her frail body that I saw the day before, and put my arms around it and never ever let it go into the grave, that dark hole, even though my father awaits and has been waiting for 18 years. Who can understand death? It's beyond words, but the loss is inexplicable. There's something else that my mother sent me to comfort me that I can touch upon, and I did touch upon it in my eulogy. The day before my mother's body had been on display, just about 500 meters from the church, I invited 15 people And understandably, only 2 said they would come. Of course, my brothers and I went, but I mean the non-family members. So my brothers had come and left, and I decided to stay longer, also for some administrative duties, because it's in the funeral parlor. Kasia came. Kasia has been a family friend for 15 years, and I was so pleased to see her. Her strength was obvious, and we stood together looking at Mum, and we wept together at my mum's side. We couldn't believe she was just there. And suddenly Kasia came with some message which was just profound. It was not coming from her. Honestly, it was like with an authority you would not believe. You had to be there at the time. And the essence of the message was, live your life to the fullest, because I'll be watching you. As my mother was there, I knew it was coming directly, and she had organized for Kasia to come. And since my mum's passing, there have been numerous events that have just fitted in, and I know that I have been assisted by her passing. In fact, in summary, I could say that I am 20% increased as a person, on all levels, physically, emotionally, mentally, with the surety of what steps to take in life, less fear, knowing that I will be fine. My mother will always guide me. That's the gift that she's given me. Of this I have no doubt. So as Kasia left, I realized that now was the time to open the letter that I've been carrying for 16 years from my mother, that I showed you. Finally, you can see it's yellow with the age. And as I opened the letter, I read the poem to you at the eulogy. Effectively, it was the same message as Kasia said to me about when I feel that she's there from some evidence or something, she's saying she's there. Don't doubt it. It's me, she said. Every time, it's me. Don't doubt it. And don't be scared. And since that time, absolutely it's her. So I have a duty though. My duty is to live a good life, a pure life, and help people. Should I go off the path, she will diminish. I have to stay on. And I know every time when it's diminishing, I have to go back on the track. So it's the greatest gift she could ever have given me. And I read the message and thought, that's all I need for my healing. But there was one more gift. So they wanted to close this funeral parlor, and suddenly Sandra came. Sandra said, I cannot view your mother. I just can't do it. Sandra's mother has also passed away. She said, I will not even view my own mother, Peter. It's something I can't do. But I had to come, so Betty knew I came. So as she came out, she also brought something down. She started to speak. She said, what did you expect, that she could stay around when her body is not working? It wasn't working. Her body couldn't work anymore. This wasn't good and that wasn't good. She needed to go. And I thought, Mom, you brought the second comfort I need. Because for my healing, all I need to know is that you're still around. And the second thing I need to know is that you had to go. There's nothing else I need. I only need these 2 things. And it was a miracle that you brought 2 people you couldn't deliver the message, and they delivered it to me. So at the funeral, I couldn't give the full story, but I was greatly impacted. It's almost as if the universe takes something away, but if you watch carefully, it will bring something back and never leave you with nothing. And so what I have, dear Mom, is your presence, that you're here, and that you don't suffer anymore on this plane. And so the grief, I also wanted to say, I loved you fiercely. It kept coming, I loved you fiercely. If anybody had come across you, my God, they'd be in trouble. It was always about protecting you, and it was my pleasure to do it. My absolute pleasure. It was a blessing to me. There is nothing I regret about my life at all, the way it's unfolded. Nothing at all. And I'm entirely happy with who I am. And much of it is because of you and the gifts you gave us and my brothers for our development. We have only ourselves to blame. You and my dad gave us everything we would ever need to lead a good life. It's up to us. And now I've written here, a glorious process to watch you guide me. It's a glorious process to watch you guide me, and to have something there, this goodness, this knowledge, this knowing. So I do thank you all for listening with this opportunity to represent my mother's life, of her trailblazing life that started something new, where two continents could come together and be joined together through their union. At the party, there wasn't too much left for Mum to do, and she was suffering, and she left. I had planned to come and look after Mum. I was going to resign my position and dedicate myself towards her, looking after her. I had it all planned. And she's smiling at me now, saying, I don't want you wasting your life on me. I don't want you dedicating your life on me, feeding me by hand, and all the things you have to do. You go and live your life like what she told me. And I'm like, I wanted to do it, Mum. But she said, I know better. You should release now. It's enough, it's done. And I don't want you tying your life up with me, as she has always done, selfless. A selfless spirit and soul. So I do thank you for listening to this. I know that it's a little bit unusual, but I do want a record of my mother's life somewhere, that someone recounts what she's done. And we have the pictures, so I've referred to them. And also I wanted to share that it wasn't just her personality. Of all the tributes that were spoken about her, she had a genuine beauty in her, that if you look at some of those photos from her last 2 years, you can see it in there. As she regressed to a very young person, it was a miracle to me, and especially a miracle of her messages to me since she's passed. So I want to share them. I want people to know. And with this, it seems that my job, it's done. My final task for my mother, which she said, don't bother, it's fine, but I have to finish. I have to finish. It cannot be left unsaid. And on that note, you find me a man that can go forward in his life to the next phase, having done this, not alone. She is present. And it's up to us all, if you lose a loved one. There's certain things you have to do to fertilize that connection. You have to feed it. You also have a duty. It's not just there. But if you do, you will see that the gift is given when the loved one has gone, that they indeed are still there. So I thank you all for listening very much. I don't know who would make it to this time after such a long speech that's so personal. After all, it's our family, not yours. But I hope some of you made it to the end and you'll get something out of this. I'm delighted to share my mum with you. And there's another photo on the last page, the one at the top. The one at the top there. You can see again that she looks like a child. She's 92. And I showed one of these photos yesterday to someone, and they said, 62? 60-something? So you can see her. I said, no, 92. What? So apparently it's not just me that sees it that way. So my dear mum, thank you for you and the great mum that you are. What a mum, as I said in my eulogy. And I thank you so much for not leaving me. She's always on the right-hand side for some reason, up here. I will nurture our connection, and especially after seeing your true light, I do want to meet you again. That's the impression that I have. And as we say in the Middle East, inshallah, I will meet you again. So thank you, everybody, for letting me get this out into the world as a recording. I hope it's of benefit and use to someone and add some light into this world. And it's a record of the great, great life of Mrs. Omotoso, the loyal wife, the mother, the exemplary mother. I don't see how she could have been a better mother. I honestly don't see it. And as I said in my eulogy, she put not a foot wrong in her life. She never offended a soul. And she had no greed. So we have been so lucky, but it's for us to recognize what we've been given, because it's in us, and make her proud, all of us, all three boys, so that we go forth into the world and pay it forward and make things better. That's the way we can celebrate our mum's life and all her dedication and her suffering towards the end. So dear mum, every morning I think of you as soon as I wake up and connect with you. It says here that you touch the lives of many and you will be forever missed. You certainly will be forever missed by so many of us here today. And I hope some of you are glad that I'm speaking for all of us. I guess I'm channeling what everybody wants to say. That's my role. It's not just for me. That this mum, somewhere on this earth, this video is a record of her life. She deserves more than just going quietly into the grave. I have to represent my mum. She was understated, so you will not know unless you look and study. She wasn't famous, but how many children did she teach? Thousands. And always doing the right thing for them. So Mum, even though you didn't want me to do this because it's work, you want me to rest, I'm happy that I pushed through in order to share your life with a greater audience and speak from the heart about your subdued greatness, and that other people might emulate you, and that even though you're not famous, every interaction that's one-on-one, something good comes into this world. And you are a fantastic example. I couldn't wish for more. So I'm quite excited as I go forward in the rest of my years that I'm enhanced because of you. And my healing now through this is very much helped by my sharing your light with the world. I'm very much helped. And so I'm also helped by you watching on the other side, that you've listened to the message of my mum and felt her presence perhaps through me, that she doesn't go to the grave quietly. She goes to the grave with her son that won't stop talking, that insists on representing her, because I loved you fiercely, Mum, and I still love you fiercely. I am so heartbroken to let you go, but as you can hear from my speech, you've given so much more back. I miss you eternally, but inshallah we will meet again. Thank you, dear Mum. God bless you, Mum, and may I meet you again. Thank you, everybody.